Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Welcome to our Ritual Night Talk for September 21st. I'm Scott Stenwick, your host for these Ritual Night Talk events, presented under the auspices of Leaping Laughter OTO in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Now, one of the things that you may be wondering about is last year, right around the fall equinox, we did the subhead right here, broadcast it. Well, we're not doing that tonight because this weekend we are doing the subhead right again at the lodge in person after this long year of pandemic. So that's a good thing. We are going to be finally getting back together to do the first of these seasonal rituals that I've been doing on the Tuesday nights, and I'm very much looking forward to that. Also had a long weekend last weekend with mass and initiations. Seems like stuff is kind of starting to get back to speed to where it was, even though, we're still under some restrictions, but we've been navigating them. And for most of the folks, stuff seems to be going okay. So tonight I'm going to talk about something a little bit different than I previously have. And before I get to that, got to remember my little YouTube spiel. So like, subscribe, request notifications. That way you'll always know when we go online with these ritual night events. And like I mentioned last week, we are eventually going to get back to doing in-person ritual night events, but we also are going to try to see if we can maybe like record a video at the beginning and upload it or do something like that, so that we still have the online aspect of these talks, which people seem to appreciate and enjoy. So subject tonight that I'm going to talk about that is a little different than some of the other subjects I've talked about is magic as art and science. I talk a lot about my ideas of science in relation to magic on these talks. And, I'll talk about these ideas about how, I think quantum information structures work. And, hopefully it does not come off too much as me being a new ager who is, saying, well, quantum, it's like a synonym for awesome. I have a quantum car. That's a cool car. Okay, no. Hopefully it's not that. Although I will freely admit that I take that risk every time I talk about quantum information and magic. But there is another dimension to magic. If you look at both Crowley's definition and Dion Fortune's definition of magic, which I discussed a little bit in a different video, that magic is the science and art. That's the first part of that statement of causing change in conformity with will, or of causing change in consciousness in conformity with will, depending on whether you read it as Crowley or Fortune. And the thing about that is that magic is an artistic thing. Okay, it's not just about, sitting down and, putting together a bunch of tools and following this process that, is this like written out, scientific kind of thing with the idea that it's going to make something happen in a deterministic way, because that isn't how it works. Consciousness, your consciousness, is the key element to every magical operation. That's the reason that magic is hard to explore scientifically. Okay. And the thing about that is that, well, if we had the consciousness measure, like I keep mentioning here, we could totally sit down and say, all right, we got the consciousness measure and we're good to go. Now, but since we don't have that, one of the things that we need to understand about magic is that magic is not a deterministic process, not in the slightest. Okay. Magic is a process that is variable, it's probabilistic, and it depends very much on the practitioner's exact state of consciousness at different points in the operation. And if that's something that is difficult to, is difficult to measure in a scientific way, which it is, it means that magic is hard to validate scientifically. And it probably always will be until we have a methodology to deal with that consciousness factor. The consciousness factor is important. Okay, so the thing about art is that art is a way of uplifting consciousness and inspiring you to do things. So that's one way in which art comes into the equation. Another way in which art comes into the equation is that magic is, you have all these tools and you have all these things, but you could do some pretty complicated, involved things with magic that involve a lot of creativity. And that creativity can really help you, fuel your life and get to a point where, your life is beautiful and inspiring and, basically just, awesome. And to back up from there a little bit, there are people who teach magic as this idea that, magic is supposed to involve hardship and difficulty and all this kind of stuff. Magic does involve discipline. It's extremely important to be self-disciplined when you do magic. But that discipline is not what we often think about in the context of our culture. The real discipline of magic is getting into the circle, doing practices day in, day out. And it sounds easy, right? This is a practice sequence, takes 10 or 15 minutes, do it every day. Okay, sounds easy, try it. It's harder than you think. And the point of it is that magic is not about, pushing yourself beyond, any reasonable bound with the kind of things that you're doing. It's not about that at all. Magic is about persistence and determination. And it's about working toward the uplifting, enlightenment, development, however you want to think about it, of your own consciousness, and developing a life around that consciousness that supports what you do. And that's the artistic part. What that is, you get to be creative about your life. You get to define what your priorities are. You get to think about, how do you want to calculate success, measure success, experience success, because it's not always like a calculation or measurement or anything like that. That's the whole, if you're a magician, why are you poor? That argument, which fundamentally assumes that, absolutely everybody wants to be rich. And so every magician must be out there doing money magic all the time, because clearly what everyone wants is money. That's not really true. There are, many things that are meaningful in life besides money, although in our society, it's nice to have some, definitely. But at the same time, you could be working toward, just building your creativity. You could use magic to support conventional art. Let's say that you're a painter. Let's say you're a writer. You can use magic to increase your creativity, to increase your creative output, and to increase your insights. And all that stuff involves looking at the different magical tools at your disposal and engaging with them in an insightful and intelligent way. So thinking that, I can do this conjuration to create this one probability shift. Instead, look holistically at your entire life and see, all right, where are the points in my life that I want to apply magic to make it better? And the point is, it's about making your life better. If you get into an online forum, somebody tells you, magic, it actually makes your life like really, really terrible. And then at the end say, but it's worth it. Is it? Because you could do that stuff. You can get to gnosis. You can get to, enlightenment. You can get to spiritual realization. You can get to apprehension of the truth without wrecking your whole life. This is one of the things that I stress with my students. It's one of the reasons I'm big on do the practical work right away. I don't tell my students, don't do that, holy guardian angel invocation. Yeah, I know it's important in Thelema. Don't do that. I don't say that. But what I do say is, I say, look, definitely work toward that. But, develop your ability to do magic by doing practical magic and measuring your successes. And when you do that to solve problems in your life, it's like you are treating your life as a piece of art, okay? And that's the mindset. The universe is my palette. These probability forces that I can manipulate, that's my paintbrush. Now, what am I going to build? The what am I going to build, in a lot of ways, is an even more important question than how does it work? And I know I talk about how does it work all the time. When you come up as like, an old school computer hacker, you work in computers, you're used to this, engineering kind of mindset of here's where the pieces go and here's what they do. Okay, but really Magic starts with a desire for some kind of change based on your reflection on your life and something that you want and something that you want to change based on your insight about how you envision your life to be. Just like a painter sits down and says, all right, well, this is kind of what I'm going to envision. This is what I want to paint. Just like a writer sits down and says, all right, this is the story that I want to tell. It's going to have these characters and it's going to kind of go like this. And these points are starting points. And the reason they are important is because they are starting points. This is where you say, here's the magic that I want to do to create creativity, this particular thing in my life, which is either lacking or I have it, but not quite in the way that I want. So you're either going to bring something in, you're going to change something, or maybe you want to get rid of something too that's in your life. I'd rather not have that in my life. I want that out, this in, and this transformed. And all of that stuff is completely valid and completely viable to do with magic. And you shouldn't be afraid of doing it. You shouldn't be feeling like, oh, well, I'm doing magic for myself by making my life this way. So that's, I don't know, disrespectful to what? I mean, we have these abilities for a reason. We have this lore for a reason. There's a reason that, there are spirits out there willing to work with us. All of those things are things that, suggest that magic is a natural thing. It is part of the natural world. And it's something that we should make use of to the extent that we can to make our lives awesome. Okay? And so from that standpoint, having an artistic idea of magic like that aids gnosis because gnosis is powered by inspiration. Have you ever gone to a ritual or something? You just feel like, wow, really inspired by, hair stands up on the back of your neck kind of thing. All right. That is the predecessor to gnosis. That is what you're looking for. Okay. I have worked with some chaos magicians back in the past who would say things like, oh yeah, well, you hyperventilate and that's gnosis. And I'm like, I don't believe that. I mean, and not to diss chaos magic at all. I mean, I'm more of a formal ceremonialist than that, but many of the structures I do were inspired by chaos magic. And I think that, Carol's work was, one of the first, real steps forward in magic theory, probably since, Thelema and Crowley. I mean, you had a movement where they really worked on breaking magic down to its, fundamental effective essentials, getting rid of some of the lore, some of the things they got rid of, I don't agree with. But I mean, I'll do a talk on chaos magic at some point and talk a little bit about the differences there. But anyway, the thing is that gnosis is a shift in consciousness, which is how Carol defined it, but it's a specific kind of shift in consciousness. So it's that sense of kind of awe, wonder, and elevation of your consciousness. It really does feel like your consciousness is lifting up when this happens. Okay. And that's the kind of thing where art, conventional art, can have an important role in not bringing gnosis just to you, but to other people. Dramatic rituals are supposed to work this way. When you're doing a dramatic ritual, what you're doing is you're trying to employ aesthetics and artistic concepts to convey the sense of gnosis to everybody who is watching the ritual, and presumably the people who are performing it as well. And that's important. Okay, it's also very hard. If you look at Crowley actually did transition more from focusing on ceremonial rituals earlier in his career into more dramatic rituals. He put together the Rites of Eleusis, of course, developed the Gnostic Mass, which is an excellent dramatic ritual. And he did a lot of things like that, where what was going on is he's trying to impart something to an audience, to not just communicate an idea. That's part of it, but to communicate an idea that also induces this shift in consciousness. That is really the key, because presumably if people were more inspired everywhere in the world, gnosis would be easier, because that inspiration is really what kicks it off. So, you got people walking around in a state of inspiration all the time, instead of, a state of, I got to go to my job. I got to, make money so, I can pay the rent and all this kind of stuff. And All those things are absolutely necessary. But magic is about making it easier to do those things so you can do other things. And that is a key concept that I think some teachers don't necessarily go into. The kind of the what's it all for, the Zen, the kind of not it's not actually Zen. It's like a Zen style kind of thing of, well, I practiced magic for however many years, only to learn that I never needed to practice magic at all. Okay, if you learned that from 20 years of practicing magic, you learned the wrong thing. I'm going to call you wrong right there. Because the point is that, well, you get to a point where you don't need it as much, right? You start out, you start working at things, you start designing the life that you want, you start creating stuff. And, the stuff that you create, if you're smart about it, helps your life work better. And so your life continues to work better and continues to work better and continues to work better. And you finally get to a point where you don't necessarily need to throw spells all over the place, just to get by. You get to a point where your life is created in a way that pretty much takes care of a lot of those things. And, or at least, takes care of more of those things than when you started out. And that is a good measure of progress. Your life should be progressing in a direction that is in harmony with your will, whatever your will is, which in Thelema is defined as, being as true to yourself as you can be. So, the classic axiom of know thyself, know thyself is the first part of true will. That's understanding what your true will is and what are the kinds of things in your life that will make you happiest. And then accomplishing your true will is setting those things in motion, bringing those things into your life, putting things out of your life that act in conflict with it, and so on. And this is a completely artistic process. You can think of yourself as a work of art that you are creating. So it's like the future you is the work of art that the present you is creating. And the idea is that the future you is going to be better by whatever criteria you, as the artist, define as better. A lot of the stuff has to do with introspection. You have to figure out what heuristic you want to use. You want to figure out, well, how do I work out what's better? Well, you have to figure that out. And you have to figure that out not in reference to be clear, external society and external society's values. Society's mainstream values are mainstream values, I believe, because they are values that a significant percentage of people value in one way or another. I do think that there's kind of a wisdom of crowds sort of effect that happens with societal values, but at the same time, it is no more, that doesn't make it any more viable or better to go along with society's values just because, the largest group of people tend to like that. Magicians tend to be weirdos. We tend to be oddballs. We tend to like different stuff than, what the majority does. And, maybe that's just because, well, we tried to go along with what the majority thinks we should want, and that kind of sucks. So I'm going to go over here and do this. And the point of going over here and doing this, that's about following your will. But it even could be, following your will, you could line up with some of those societal values too. It's not something where, it's necessarily like a complete rejection, like a counterculture kind of thing. But it's also not, a conformity thing, where you do things just because other people do them. You should do things because they're what you want to do. And you should do things because they're what you want to do, regardless of what other people around you might or might not think of it, so long as you're not, actively going out trying to damage those people or, harm them in some tangible way. I mean, there is a point to the Wiccan idea of, and it harm none, do what thou wilt. But the thing about that is it's basically impossible to walk through the world without harming something because we don't know the ends of all our actions. I mean, if you follow these chains down, it's like, if you tried to do magic without harming anyone, it probably wouldn't work. Harm is actually not a very good limitation. I talked about limitations last week. It's like, I'll cast a spell without, injury to myself or my loved ones, damage to my property. Those are tangible things. If I said as harm to myself or, without harm to myself or my loved ones. Okay, well, there's all kinds of things that eventually could be harmful based on the accomplishment of any particular goal. And that being what it is. So harm isn't really good because it's way too general. The idea, though, is that generally speaking, when you're going out and you're doing your will, what's going to happen is you're going to clash with other people less. Okay. Some people have been very idealistic about this idea that, oh, if everyone did their true will, there would be no conflict. And I don't believe that. But I believe there would be less conflict, and I believe there would be substantially less conflict. And much of what Crowley talks about is in Magick Without Tears. He talks about how, 90% of do what thou wilt is mind your own business. And I guess what I would like to see if I were going to sculpt the world, and I've done some magic to this effect, I've got ongoing magic to this effect, what I would look at sculpting the world into is something where that could actually be true, where you didn't have people, up in arms about, something that you're doing because it's immoral. I mean, Crowley railed against that stuff all the time. It's like the whole morality police idea is pretty much the clearest violation of do what thou wilt that there is, because really you're minding somebody else's business. It doesn't affect you in any way. And these are the sorts of things we should get out of our lives. Whether other people are doing things right isn't something that we want to worry about. We want to worry about what our will is, and we want to worry about what we're doing with our magical artistic process to sculpt our life in the way that we want. Certainly, when there are conflicts, you use magic to deal with that, just like you do, any other obstacle. But the point of it is not to build yourself up at the expense of other people. The point is to build yourself up and, in the context of, I'm building myself up without, pushing anybody else down. I'm just working to make my life better. And so that's where kind of the idea comes from. Now, and art has a role in magic. I had this tablet here. I was showing this in the thumbnail. So that's my Venus tablet. Okay, it's you do Agrippa Planetary Magic. You recognize this as the character for Venus. Then it has a heptagram in here. 7 is the number of Venus, names of different angels, and so on. Symbol of Venus down here, up here. And Venus rules artistry, aesthetics, these kinds of things. So that's why I thought the Venus tablet was an appropriate thing for the thumbnail. But making stuff like this is kind of a cool thing. Even if you're not a particularly good artist like me. And I don't know, maybe you looked at that tab and thought, wow, that looks amazing, because it does look pretty good from a distance. But I mean, if you look up close, with a lot of the stuff I make, it's kind of like, wait a minute, where did you learn to draw? And the answer is, well, I kind of didn't. But anyway, the point is that by engaging in a creative artistic process, in a way that's analogous to the creative process that is your life. And it's a way of, within specific limits of this microcosm that you are working with, or, this universe you're working with. Remember, I talked about containment structure, like a pocket universe that you do applications within. Similar kind of thing when you're working on, drawing and making something like this. I do more writing than I do visual art. So when you're working on something like, a piece of writing, same sort of thing. This is like a story, a universe, world building, this type of thing that you're creating. And so that creative process, being analogous for the magical process, is something where I think there is some sympathy and harmony there. I have known people who do art with magical focus and intention, and that art has practical effects. I mean, I'm not going to talk about any of those examples here, but I can think of several of them. And, one of the things that you are doing when you're creating a piece of art is you are focusing your attention on this thing that you're creating. And so you're fixing the thought that is related to it. So, you could focus on that, making something like a talisman or whatnot. And let me also assure you that it has more to do with the process than with the skill you have. And I say this looks nice from a distance, but A lot of things that I draw by hand, I don't have real good motor skills and stuff like that. And I could never really cut it as like a professional artist that way. But I go ahead and I make the stuff because making the stuff is really what the creative process is about. It's about focusing and grounding your practice into something tangible. And another advantage of that is you have something tangible when you're done. Venus tablet, I made this for a series of planetary operations we did, and I use it all the time for planetary, and like the other 6 too, because I have them for all the planets. I use them all the time. I have zodiacal ones that I use for the elixir rites. I've shown you some of those too. And so these kinds of things they're artistic, they're creative, they are ways of, focusing your creative intention, which you're going to use in Magick when you're creating your life the way you want it to be created. And what you're going to do is you're going to use this over and over again. And so this particular thing that you've created, this piece of art, it becomes a magical tool. You can specifically consecrate it, or it can even become a magical tool just by virtue of use. And it's something that keys into both the thing that it represents, like Venus, and the creative process itself that went into it, because you did that, you focused on that, that is rooted in your consciousness as well. So Magick is art. It's not just a science. It's not just about tweaks and probabilities and make a thing work. You can do all sorts of advanced stuff with Magick that, really requires some creativity to work out, but which when running can do a lot. You could set up multiple talismans. So first of all, you're setting up a talisman. Maybe that's an artistic thing that you made. You painted it, you drew it, you traced it, whatever. Okay, so there's some creativity there. You are taking that talisman and you are imbuing it, you are calling on a specific spirit, empower this talisman to do this. You can delimit that charge into a bunch of complicated steps. And you can create multiple talismans that don't interfere with each other and which synergize and work to, this talisman does this in my life. This talisman pushes this away, and so on. And you can make as many of those as you want. Talismans do not reduce your ability to conjure probability shifts, whereas sometimes direct spells focused on you can, depending on what the spell is and how you do it. And so these things can just sit here and run. And, you can refer back to my talk on talismans with regard to how to go about doing that. But you can have a whole collection of them, like a whole galaxy of things that are doing a bunch of different things. And they can even be programmed so that they can act with like contingency. So when this happens, do this. They can talk to each other. They can be connected. There's all kinds of things like that really are kind of beyond what I could just sit down and do with, and lay out with, just the science of this is how it works. This does this. This does this, this does that, okay? And so those types of things do require some creative vision and creative insight. Just like I could tell you, you dip a paintbrush in red and then you trace red across the canvas, you get red. But you're also really talking about the big picture of the work itself. And that work is your life. And the tools you have are magical tools, magical powers, magical abilities. Your skill as a magician is a tool that you are using to create the life that you want in an artistic way, an inspiring life of joy and beauty. That's what you should be going for, in my opinion. But remember, that's my opinion. And like I said earlier, you get to define success for yourself. And that's one of the key things about working with your will. That's the big focus. And so because of that, it's this wonderful kind of opening up, inspiring kind of thing. And instead of being paralyzed by, well, I could do anything, what do I do? That is where you pay attention to the power of silent thought and meditation. Look at your life, sink into a meditative state, look at the things in your life and say, all right, what do I really like in my life? What don't I like in my life? What do I want to be different in my life? And that right there is a magical program. you're also going to find when you start to engage some of these things practically, what's going to go on is that you're going to realize, oh, well, some of these things are harder to change than others. And then maybe you want to reflect on yourself and think, all right, why is that hard to change? And there can be a lot of reasons. It's one of these things you're left to work it out for yourself, and to solve with creativity and insight. And so when you look at it from that perspective, it's a project, right? It's this really cool project. You're going to build a life for your future self using the magical skills that you have now. And then you're going to live in that life. And once you're living in that life, you're going to keep doing this process, and, to fill your life with, joy, beauty, wonder, inspiration, artistic vision, however you conceptualize that. And don't let somebody tell you in a video on YouTube, oh, well, you're doing magic for that. It's wrong. I'm not going to tell you that. There are some techniques that I think don't work. And I will say, people who say this works, I do think they're wrong. But for the most part, magic is really about primarily you doing you and you being yourself, especially thelemic magic, which is focused on this true will concept of basically becoming both your best and your most authentic self, because as Thelemites, we see those as the same thing. You might come from another perspective, but that's the perspective that I come from. That's the perspective that many other Thelemites I know come from. So I think with that, I'm going to sign off for tonight. I'm a little over half hour, a little bit of a shorter talk than some of the ones I've usually done. But I hope you found it interesting. And one of the reasons it's a little bit shorter is that instead of technical detail, this is a much more wide open kind of subject. The art of you creating your life is something that is not deterministic. It's holistic. It's nonlinear. It's irrational. Hopefully it's rational enough, but there's definitely an irrational component, that awe, that inspiration. There's really no explanation for, why that works, from a scientific perspective, there really isn't anything like that. I mean, we can say, well, the brain kind of does this, but you're still looking at the brain. You're not looking at consciousness itself. And, we're not going to really understand it, I don't think, until we look at consciousness itself. So I'm going to wrap up for tonight. Thank you all very much for watching. Again, like, subscribe, request notifications. And with that, I am going to wish you all a great rest of the evening. Love is the law, love under will.